Welcome everyone to Travel Tuesday. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening's lecture, Dr. Lucy Wadeson. Lucy has a PhD in classical archaeology from the University of Oxford and is an expert on the Nabateans, the ancient and modern Near East. Lucy has some fabulous tours coming up with ASA, Oman, Arabia's ancient emporium, and then a tour in Jordan in depth, Petra, desert fortresses, Wadi Rum, and the Red Sea. But this evening, Lucy's going to be talking to us about From Desert Trails to Ocean Sails, the cultural and commercial landscapes of Oman. So welcome, Lucy. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Susanna, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining tonight. Well, your night, my morning here in Scotland, very dark and cold and early. So my lecture today, From Desert Trails to Ocean Sails, the cultural and commercial landscapes of Oman, really is focusing on the landscapes of this beautiful and spectacular country. So when I was coming to choose my image for my title page, as you can see here, it took me ages because Oman really is a country of diverse landscapes. And it's this diversity that makes it so unique. But I had such a struggle to find one image that really encapsulates the beauty and uniqueness of Oman. So on the one hand, we have these breathtaking, soaring and timeless mountain ranges in Oman that are absolutely seeping with history, as you see in the top middle image there. But these contrast with the lush, renewable greenery of the wadis and oases that we find as well, that are sort of wadis, meaning the river valleys is the Arabic word for valley, which are creeping through these mountain ranges. And then we have these pristine golden and white beaches on the coastline of Oman. And just looking at the image at the bottom there, you'd think you're on a desert island. In fact, no, you're in Oman. And then, of course, we have the masses of desert inland as well. So you can really just see from these four images the contrasting landscapes and the diversity there. And all of these landscapes, in fact, have their own microclimates with diverse flora and fauna. So each landscape has its own mini kind of microclimate and its own different things going on there, which is another fascinating aspect to look at. And really, these landscapes haven't changed that much over the years, over the centuries. And it's no wonder the ancient inhabitants, I think, sense the divine in these landscapes, just looking at them now. But I think what's incredible is that given the hostility of some of these landscapes, such as living in the desert, which is obviously a very dry and challenging environment, limited water supplies, or living in these rugged mountain ranges, especially with high temperatures as well, is that life still flourished. We have this wealth of natural resources in Oman within these various landscapes. So we have amazing marine life, the fish provided by the ocean. We have minerals, natural minerals that were exploited since antiquity, such as copper. We have amazing agriculture, dates and pomegranates and walnuts and all these amazing plants and trees that grow. And of course, we have the well-known and famous frankincense that's sourced from the frankincense trees in the south of Oman, in the Dhofar region. So because of this wealth of resources, human settlement and life could flourish. So these resources really supported life in these challenging environments. And we know that the first established settlements in Oman were, in fact, in the Neolithic period. Neolithic literally meaning the new Stone Age, and basically named this period has got this name because stone was the predominant material used for tools at that time. So we're talking about around 8,500 to 6,000 years ago. But in fact, we have evidence that humans were in Oman from 150,000 years ago. So just to think about the time scale there. So life did flourish, in fact, and the cultures that emerged from human settlement in these landscapes were, in fact, shaped and inspired by the nature and environment that they were surrounded by. And they still continue to be. This is something that is still ongoing. So, for example, you see in the images on the slide, we have the famous monumental Bronze Age tombs in the middle bottom picture there. I'm not sure if you can see my arrow or not working there. Again, a monumental testimony to how life did flourish in the Bronze Age and the wealth that people had acquired by then through trade and exploiting the natural resources such as copper. We have a lot of architecture and creativity in the Islamic period, in the medieval and Islamic periods, such as these monumental forts that protected coastal villages. And then on the right there, of course, the amazing art and architecture that we can find in the mosques and religious architecture. And while there's obviously cultural cohesion with neighboring Arab countries, Omani culture is unique and it's characteristic as well. And this is a result of its geography and also of its history, which we'll see later on in this lecture are what facilitated trade and such a thriving economy as well. So the important thing I'd like you to think about here is how this interaction between humans and the environment is in fact a two-way process. So humans shape the environment around them, but they're also influenced by it as well. So there's a really important point to remember. So let's go back a couple of steps and look at Oman's geographical context. So starting with the map on the left there, you'll see this is a modern map, of course, showing modern nations and countries. Oman is located on the eastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, as you can see here. It's encircled by the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman there. It shares borders with Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And it also includes the governorate of Musandam, which is this little point here jutting out in the peninsula to the north, which is actually known as an exclave. So it's an exclave of Oman, and it's enclaved or surrounded by the UAE. So it's separate from Oman, but part of Oman, if that makes sense. And you'll see there it's jutting out into the Strait of Hormuz, which is a narrow entry into the Persian Gulf. And as you can see, they're very close to Iran. This is significant because you can see we can get lots of cultural influences and connections with Iran to the north there. So I think also what's notable by looking at the map of Oman here is that we have masses of coastline. So there's something like 3,000 kilometers of coastline. So the country is very outward looking in that sense. It looks towards the east, but at the same time, it's connected to the west. So really important strategic location here. And that is, I think, also what resulted in its unique culture, the fact that it's had so many different influences over time that have helped develop this unique cultural identity. And of course, it's a strategic location for trade. So it's an important stopping point for ships that were crossing the Indian Ocean to the west. And because of this very long coastline, we have natural harbors that provide shelter and protection for the ships that were involved in trade and also in fishing as well. Now, moving across there to the right map, I'm just looking at sort of the geography of Oman. You'll see that it's got two major mountain ranges, one in the north there known as the Al-Hajjar mountain range, which is kind of coming over the top of Oman in this sort of arc there. And then also we have the Dhofar mountain range right down in the south of the country as well. And in between, we have masses of desert. So we have the Wahiba Sands, or the Ash-Shakir is another name it's known by, in the west there, just under Muscat. We have the Jiddat al-Harassas in the middle. And then we have over this area, the famous empty quarter, which is known in Arabic as the Rub al-Khali. So we have contrasting, like I said, like I showed you in the images in the first slides, we have these contrasting landscapes. So this is just to situate yourself with them by looking at this geographical map here. And then, of course, we have the wadis, as I mentioned, the river valleys that are coming off the mountains there. And on the coastal side, these wadis provide the bays and inlets, which allowed the fishing communities to flourish. And on the mountainous or inland side, they have many oases and of course, which allowed settlements to flourish as well. So really important there to the life in Oman. Now, coming back to this idea of connectivity. So what you're looking at here is a map of the caravan routes that were crossing Arabia in the first millennium BCE, as well as the sea routes indicated there in dashed lines. Now, of course, this map is prior to the establishment of nation states, which is obviously a very modern concept. So the Omani Empire was, in fact, established by the 18th century with the Al-Busaid dynasty. And it wasn't, in fact, unified until 1970 under Sultan Qaboos bin Said as the modern Sultanate of Oman. So this idea of Oman as a modern nation is fairly new, in fact, and recent compared to its centuries of history there. So this map is really good because it just shows you how things looked in the first millennium BCE. And what we have in the Arabian Peninsula is the existence of many smaller kingdoms dominating various areas from South Arabia right up into Northwest Arabia. And of course, if you attended my lecture on Petra, the Nabateans had their famous kingdom a little bit later than this time, of course, but right up there in the just above Northwest Arabia there. So in antiquity, Oman was in fact quite remote and isolated because of the desert, because of this large empty quarter that covers parts of Oman now and also a big part of Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And it had this coastline, which is in fact quite dangerous in parts because in the south, you have steep cliffs descending into the sea, making it quite inaccessible. And you have the northern mountain range of Al Hajar. So in effect, in antiquity, it was actually quite sort of isolated and cut off in that respect. And it was well known by Greek and Roman historians and geographers in the Greco-Roman period, of course. And they called this part of Arabia Arabia Felix, which literally means happy Arabia, or sort of more literally maybe fertile Arabia. And this is because they realized that it was such a fertile region, the fact that it grew the frankincense trees and there was lots of prosperity. So this is how they termed this region in antiquity. And I'm talking about historians and geographers such as Pliny the Elder, who famously died in the eruption of Vesuvius, Pompeii in 79 CE, and Ptolemy the geographer, who was famous for describing all the port towns and important commercial centers in the Arabian Peninsula. So he, in fact, had a sort of one of the first map makers who had lists of places. And scholars are still struggling today to try and match up some of the places mentioned by Ptolemy with actual sites and cities on the ground there. So it's described by these ancient authors as commercially significant. And Pliny calls the people who live there some of the richest people on the earth, which is really significant. And also we have mention of what we believe is Oman by the Sumerians in 2300 BCE. And they call it Magan. And this is, they talk about Magan as being the sort of source of copper for Mesopotamia. So they are getting copper. And this was traded for wood from Mesopotamia and also spices from India. So already by the Bronze Age, trade was well established. And we know we have important sites that had been excavated in Oman when we know copper production was taking place, copper mining, such as Ras Al Jins, for example. Now, thinking about these routes, these trade routes, of course, they carried risks. They weren't particularly safe all the time. So the sea routes carried dangers such as attacks by pirates and also just generally being out in the ocean there, especially around rugged coastlines. And the land routes or the desert routes, which you see noted by the red lines here, winding their way through Arabia, they had dangers from thieves or tribes who were wandering through the desert as well. They could face attacks from thieving tribes. and they tended to bypass major cities to avoid taxes as well. So they were very carefully thought out, these routes, as they were established. But we can see here in this map that they were well established by the first millennium BC. Now, here's another very similar map, maybe just to give you a better idea or a better visual there of how the trade routes really connected the east and the west. You'll see there the empty quarter, this massive desert, the Rub al Khali, depicted very well on this map there, and also other deserts in the Arabian Peninsula. And you also see mention of the Silk Road up in the top of the map there. Now, it's more commonly known now as the Silk Routes, because what in fact we have are these series of segmented routes that connected basically China and the Mediterranean from the 2nd century BCE right up until the 15th century there. So Chinese silk is mentioned by the Greek and Roman authors such as Strabo, the geographer, and Pliny the Elder, as I mentioned earlier. So they talk about silk and other products coming from China, and they mention how luxurious the products are and how exotic they are. And Pliny's actually he's saying it's far too decadent, in fact, and he's worried that Romans are getting influenced negatively by using exotic products. So they refer to the Chinese as Ceres there. So this is how all the routes eventually connected up to each other, as you see there, the ones traversing the Arabian Peninsula connecting up with the eventual silk routes there as well. And it's due to these trade routes and this trade of natural resources that major ports and commercial centres, in fact, developed and flourished, especially on the coast there. You'll see, most of the important towns and cities are located on the coast, of course, and they became international hubs of cultural exchange because of so many people, goods, and ideas passing through there. So I'm just going to mention some of the more well-known coastal towns and villages of Oman just now, starting with Sohar. Now, as you see on my map on the right, it's just right up in the top there in the north of Oman, as you'll see on the map, Sohar or Suhar. And this is a port city on the sea routes. It might be the town that Pliny the Elder calls Omana in his work. We're not sure. This is still debated and possibly related to the modern name for the country, Oman. But very interestingly, we have, even though these port cities tended to flourish in the medieval period, for example, the 10th century, a lot of them have ancient foundations going far back, well before this time. So, in fact, we have Roman coins in the foundation of the fort of Sohar. We have red pottery that's been imported from India in the 2nd and 3rd century CE. And we also have remains of ancient trade seals. So just to really shows you the significance of Sohar in trade from antiquity there. And also, according to the Arabic writer al-Istakri in the 10th century, he calls Sohar one of the richest and greatest seaports of Islam as well, of the Islamic period there. And it was famous as a port that leaded to China. So ships went to China as early as the 6th century, famously to Guangzhou there as well, where there was a lot of relations, and even Arab merchants settled in China, and they still have descendants who are still trading in frankincense and organizing their families around the trade and production of frankincense there. It's also possibly the mythical birthplace of Sinbad the Sailor. So another interesting fact about Sohar. Moving on now to Muscat. Now, Muscat, obviously the capital of Oman. And I think what's striking about Muscat, as you can see, I just have one image there, but famously the whitewashed buildings, which are not particularly high, that characterize this great city, really contrast with the Al-Hajjar Mountains in the background there as a backdrop. So you have this real contrast here between nature and culture, between the environment and the humans that live in it here. And this is, again, another famous port city, a leading port for trade since antiquity. And it's described by Ptolemy, the geographer, And it's called, well, it's debated whether Muscat is either the Cryptus Portus or the Mosca Portus, described by Ptolemy when he lists his important place names of Arabia. So Cryptus Portus means hidden port. Mosca Portus, yeah, there's lots of debate about what Mosca means, but it could refer to what's now modern Muscat. So it's not really agreed by scholars. But importantly, it was known as a famous port. And it in fact has two natural harbours, so it makes it really good for trade and for ships coming in there as well. And we have, again, settlement in the 6th millennium BCE. We have burials of fishermen just outside Muscat. And that reminds us that these cities actually began as fishing communities to exploit the resources of the ocean there, of the coast. And fishing is really still important in trade in Oman, as you can see in the image there. Now, interestingly, it fell to a Sassanid invasion in the 3rd century CE under the Sassanid king Shapur I. And I think this reminds us that other kingdoms and empires were jealous of the economical success of Oman. And of course, thinking about the wealth of Muscat and its location in antiquity, you know, these other empires wanted a part of that. So that's a reason that they were invaded and taken over as well. So, of course, this is again another really important port in the Islamic period. It now is home to the famous Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque, and it's famous for its traditional souks. So I think what's really unique and important about Muscat is when you visit a city like this, you are really stepping back in time. Not a lot has changed. So you can really get a feel for how the port, what it felt like to live in this port city centuries earlier as well. Now we go a little bit further south, well, a bit more than a little bit, 203 kilometers southeast of Muscat. You can see Sur on the map there, located on the coast. Again, another famous port city, but this, in fact, is famous for its forts, as you see the various towers shown in the images here. So when you have these coastal port cities, they need protection from pirates and other people arriving from the sea. So these forts remind us of the importance of these cities, the wealth that they're procuring, and how they needed protection and security. By the 6th century CE, Sur was an established centre for trade with East Africa. And by the 8th century, we know that it was this kind of golden age of commerce. So there was really a lot going on here. But I've included Sur here because it's famous for the construction of the traditional wooden ships in Oman, which are referred to as the dhow. Now, this is a generic name that covers many different types of traditional wooden ships. And they are central to Oman's maritime heritage there. So they were used not just for trade, but also for fishing, of course, as well. And Sur is famous, of course, for the construction of these boats. And you can still see how they are constructed. And you can also experience sailing in the dhow as well. So you can really know what it was like to sail in such a ship as well in the past. The building techniques of these boats has been passed down through centuries, and scholars debate the origins of the design, possibly originated in India, but we're not sure. But they have these distinctive triangular sails as well. So they'll be seen bopping up and down in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Ocean as well. But Sur's famous for the construction of them there. And interestingly enough, we have evidence from the Bronze Age that they were making reed boats that were coated in bitumen to make them waterproof. And this is also really significant because we have similar boats described in the famous Epic of Gilgamesh as well. And another point to remember is that Omani seafarers were in fact famed for their navigation. So they took advantage of the monsoon winds that were coming from the Indian Ocean, from the southwest, and they also used astronomy for navigation. And this reminds us that they were so in tune with their environment, and they used this to their advantage as well. Now, further south from Sur, roughly about 60 kilometers, we come to the easternmost point of the Arabian Peninsula at a site known as Ras Al Jins. And this is famous because it's a nesting site for the endangered green turtles. So we have a turtle reserve established there now. Now, for those of you joining the tour, you're lucky enough to see these turtles in action because it's exactly the right time of year when they'll be nesting. But what's really interesting about this site as well is that it's also a Bronze Age port site. So again, just to remind you, Bronze Age, talking about around 2200 BCE. And at this Bronze Age port site, we have evidence that they were processing the shells of shellfish and also turtle shell as well. So, they were exploiting the resources available, and it might seem sort of shocking to us now to use these amazing creatures in that way, to use them for their food and also to use the shells for ornaments and for other objects. But this was going on as well. So we have evidence of shell processing. And we also have evidence that there was trade with Indus Valley civilizations. So by Indus Valley, I mean the area of what's now northwestern Pakistan and parts of India. So we have ceramics that have come from the Indus Valley that have ended up at Ras Al Jins, in this harbour town in the Bronze Age. So we can know that Ras Al Jins was part of this great trading system that was linked with the Indian Ocean back in the Bronze Age. And here we also have evidence of ancient boat construction as well. So we actually have archaeological evidence as well. So I talked about we have remains of bitumen, but here we don't just have the bitumen that was used to make the boats waterproof, but we have the imprints and traces of ropes and reed that remain on the bitumen itself that allow us to know how these boats were constructed. So importantly, turtles were, of course, exploited in the past. We find remains of turtles in Neolithic graves and burials, and we also find them in rock art, for example, in Wadi Nafun, which is in Dukum in south central Oman, from the 5th millennium BCE. So just to show you the sort of endurance of the turtle there, and it's not just something that's from modern times as well. They've been there forever. Moving away from the coast, we come to thinking about the wadis and the mountains. And again, landscapes where life, in fact, did flourish, but they weren't always easy. So there are challenges involved in living in the mountains. So, for example, you have very high temperatures in summer. You also have the problem of living in the mountainous environment. But ancient inhabitants overcame this by exploiting water resources and actually using water to support agriculture. So in the Jebel Akhdar region, literally Jebel Akhdar means the green mountain. You'll see remains of terracing there in the top left image there, going down the cliff. And Birkat al-Moz is an oasis settlement in the Wadi. Al-Moz literally means bananas. So it's almost like the sort of the well or place of bananas there. And agriculture and this lush plantations thrived because of this sophisticated water irrigation system that the inhabitants established, known as the aflaj in plural, or the falaj. So the falaj is the name, the singular for this water irrigation. And so that allowed things like roses to be grown, walnuts, pomegranates, date palms, all things that, of course, sustained life as well. And also think about how these wadis in the mountains also provided access and routes to the coastal communities that we've just been looking at as well. So they also facilitated regional trade of this agricultural produce, with the produce coming from the sea as well. So Birkat al-Moz is famous for its falaj, in fact, one of the oldest falaj that's still in use in the region. And it's one of the Omani falaj that is, in fact, listed as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO as well. So there's several of them, but this is one of the more famous ones there. Now, the falaj system, in fact, takes advantage of groundwater, sort of high water tables, and involves the use of vertical shafts and channels that distribute water evenly to different communities and to different areas there. And it basically uses gravity. So it taps into the water supply that's from the aquifers in the mountains, using gravity to then take them and distribute them to different settlements and oases there. And just to name some of the more well-known wadis in Oman, we have what's known as Wadi Tiwi and Wadi Ashab on the left there. Wadi Tiwi on the right is famous because it has fresh water all year round, and you'll just see how lush and green it is, supporting the growth of like I said, date palms, bananas, pomegranates. And Wadi Tiwi is famous also because it was mentioned by the famous medieval Moroccan explorer known as Ibn Battuta. And he was there in 1330, and he talks about this flourishing agriculture at that time as well, and how impressed he was by it. So again, we have the use of the Aflaj, the water irrigation, that was established by 500 CE, but in fact its origins go well back, possibly to many thousands of years earlier, because we see similarities with the Persian Qanat system as well. So the Falaj are part of Omani identity and heritage, and really important to that as well, the sophisticated use of water to make settlements sustainable and to provide vegetation and a source of food as well. Then we come to Wadi Darbat in the Dhofar region in the south of Oman, famous for this blue lagoon above the cliffs, as you see here, just absolutely stunning when you think about the green and the blue and the colours there. Also famous for waterfalls, and it's very, very green during the monsoon period. So the monsoon that's coming from the Indian Ocean is known as the Kharif, and this occurs from June to September in the year there. And again, moving away from the wadis, we come to our final landscape, the desert landscapes, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this lecture. So now we have these massive seas of sand rather than water here, and probably the more challenging place to live, the more challenging landscapes of the country there. And I mentioned we have both the famous Wahiba Sands up in the north, and then the Ruba Khali, the empty quarter. The empty quarter is approximately 650,000 square kilometers, and it contains some of the largest sand dunes in the world. For example, one of them is 300 by 80 kilometers in size there. And some of these dunes can reach 250 meters in height as well. So absolutely stunning. And the Wahiba Sands are famous for their large linear sand dunes, which are known as safe dunes. They have these linear patterns in the landscape. Safe literally means sword in Arabic, so they've been likened to the form of an Arabic sword there as well. And in the 1940s and 50s, famously, the British explorer known as Wilfrid Thesiger crossed the empty quarter, and he mapped large parts of it, and he discusses these in his famous volume Arabian Sands, which you may have heard of as well. Interestingly enough, also, Bedouin life hasn't changed much over the centuries in the desert, so it retains most of the traditions of living in the desert there as well. And moving beyond these kind of natural landscapes and how life thrived there, we also have this idea of how landscapes have been memorialized in Oman. So this is really the construction of memory in the landscape. So thinking about the past in the past. And the kinds of monuments that typically memorialize the landscape do include things like tombs, monumental tombs. And the ones you are looking at here in this slide are the famous beehive tombs from Bronze Age Al Ain, along the ridge here, with the stunning mountainous backdrop behind them, almost imitating the form of the mountain that's framing them there. And these tombs are really testament to the wealth and prosperity of Bronze Age settlements. As I mentioned, they were famous for mining copper and then trading the copper. And monumental tombs were this expression of wealth and status and prestige. So they're really important markers in the landscape, and they were meant for eternity. They have these sophisticated building techniques. There's the use of dry stone to construct the walls of these chambered tombs. And this knowledge, of course, would have come through contact with other cultures via the trade. So the sophisticated knowledge, which is expressed in these monumental tombs, and they were meant for eternity. And in fact, they have survive. They still to survive to us today. So they're doing their job of what they were intended to do there as well. They also defined territories as well. We think they might have been sort of markers of territory and of famous clans or families in these settlements. Now, jumping forth to the 12th century, so more than 3,000 years later than the famous Bronze Age tombs of Bat and Alain, another way the landscape is memorialized in Oman is by religious shrines as well, which are also formed around tombs again. So these monuments of memory, let's say. And there's a famous one, the shrine of Muhammad bin Ali in Mirbat from the 12th century, near Salalah in the south of Oman. And again, look at this stunning contrast between the whitewashed domes of this tomb and shrine with the natural landscape and sort of rugged mountains behind. So this figure, Muhammad bin Ali, he was a respected Islamic scholar and holy man, and said to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad as well. And his shrine is surrounded by this large cemetery, and it's a famous sort of peaceful place that people come to visit as well. And a really good example of medieval architecture of the time. And you might notice the use of the crenellations or crow steps there on the corners of the building. And for those who listen to my lecture on the Petra tombs, this will remind you of the crow steps used on Nabatean tombs there, which is really interesting. And this example of cultural continuity in Arabia as well over the centuries. So for the remainder of my lecture today, I want to focus on the importance of frankincense to both ancient and modern Oman. And for this, we're going to be focused on the Dhofar region in the south of Oman, where incense trees, the frankincense trees grow, so the source of the incense. So Dhofar, which is the southern province of Oman, was in fact quite distinct from the regions in the north. In the north there, around the Hajar Mountains, we have quite a high concentration of Bronze Age and Iron Age sites, which have their sort of distinct culture and mining of copper, for example. But right down in the south, in Dhofar, this region was effectively sort of cut off or isolated from the north, not just by distance, but also by the inland deserts as well. And as I said, it's the source of Oman's most famous natural resource, frankincense, which is absolutely central to Oman's history, culture, economy, and identity from the past right until the present as well. And this precious commodity was traded since the Bronze Age, but really the trade in frankincense flourished in the Iron Age. It sort of reached this new scale due to the involvement of imperial powers who wanted to profit from incense and its trade as well. So by the Iron Age, I'm talking about the Iron Age in Oman generally refers to around 800 BCE up until 200 CE there. And there's lots of famous stories in history that are centered on incense or revolve around incense. And one of those comes from the 15th century BCE, involving the famous Egyptian female pharaoh, Queen Hatshepsut. And she led a maritime expedition to the so-called land of Punt. Now, we don't really know where the land of Punt is. It could be South Arabia, likely to be South Arabia. And this expedition was to obtain frankincense trees that grow in the Dhofar region and other exotic goods as well, and take them back to Egypt. And this expedition is recorded on reliefs in her mortuary temple in Luxor. So we have these images showing frankincense trees being taken off ships and brought all the way from wherever the land of Punt was to Egypt here. So this is a really important moment in history. And just to remind you again of the trade routes of how frankincense was actually traded and moved from east to west there. So being produced in the Dhofar region, incense was then either taken by ship around to modern day Yemen, and then it could continue up through the Red Sea there, or it could be taken via land routes, via Shabwa, all the way up into the North Arabia there, going through the Nabatean site of Hegra, eventually through Petra and up to Gaza, where it was then sent off to the Mediterranean and ended up in Greece and Rome, of course. So by the Greek and Roman periods, the classical periods, incense was extremely popular in the Mediterranean. Huge quantities were burned for both religious ritual and for funerary ritual. And it is this popularity that really allowed all these kingdoms to flourish on the trade routes, the fact of the wealth that they procured through trading incense because of its demand in the West. And Greco-Roman authors also, again, talk about Arabia as being famous for its scents, for its beautiful smells, and it was famed. And so to have incense, to use incense, was also a sign of prestige and wealth. So very, very popular among Greeks and Romans there. And this trade, of course, would not have been possible without the use of the camel, the famous ship of the desert. And domestication of the camel by the first millennium BCE was what really facilitated trade and made it really take off in this period. And the camel, of course, was highly valued in antiquity. It still is valued now in modern days. It's a symbol of Arabia, so it embodies strength and endurance. The fact that the camels could travel these long distances carrying heavy loads without the need for water and food for long periods of time. And we know that they were valued in antiquity because we see them commonly depicted in art. For example, here I'm showing you rock art in Wadi Tawi in the Musandam Peninsula showing drawings of camels. And we also have evidence where camels were buried with their masters. So we have, for example, evidence of this in ancient Oman. We also have evidence of Nabatean male being buried with his camel as well, just to show you how important they were. And the camel caravan did carry risks, as I mentioned earlier as well. So this was something to think about as well. These long journeys that they were on were sometimes subject to thieves and tribes that could attack them to try and steal the precious products that they were transporting. So turning to these famous frankincense trees, known as Boswellia sacra, this variety of frankincense tree, which produces the highest quality frankincense, these trees are only found in Dhofar, in the south of Oman, and also in the Hadramaut region of Yemen, of modern-day Yemen. And they need very specific environmental conditions in which to grow. And this is what makes them really unique and really valuable because of the monsoon that arrives from June to September in the Dhofar region, of course. It provides a lot of rainfall and the exact climatic conditions for these trees to thrive. So we have rich greenery and trees growing on the mountainsides that are facing the ocean there in Dhofar. They're also difficult to attain the incense. It's by peeling away the bark of the tree to reveal this yellowish white gum resin that oozes out, and then it's dried, and then obviously very easy to transport because it's light and it's small, but extremely valuable. So valuable due to not just the rarity, but also the difficulty in obtaining it. And the Greek historian Herodotus, who was writing in the 5th century BCE, tells us that these trees were found in South Arabia. So he has this knowledge that they grew in South Arabia. And he says that they were protected by flying snakes, interestingly enough. And this is really just highlighting their exotic and precious nature, this kind of mythical story, which could hold some truth because there are, in fact, snakes known to in Africa and in parts of Africa and possibly in Arabia where they don't exactly fly, but snakes that can glide from one tree to the other. So there could be some truth in it there. So in Dhofar, we have nature reserves where these trees are protected because they are under threat from climate change and animal herds as well. So they are a protected resource. Now, thinking about uses of incense, as I said, it's extremely popular in antiquity. When it's burnt, it releases this fragrant smoke as well that we're all sure you're all aware of. It's known in Arabic as luban. It was known in Greek as lubanos and in Latin olibanum. Luban literally coming from if you know the Arabic word labne, the yogurty, cheesy yogurty product, it refers to its white sort of milky color there. That's where the name comes from. So since antiquity and right up until the present, it's been used in medicine, makeup, perfumes, cooking, used in celebrations such as weddings. It has disinfectant qualities, so it's used for cleansing and purification. So it's very commonly used in Omani households today to welcome guests to the house, to kind of revive and refresh them, and to provide this beautiful, nice smell in the house. It was burnt as part of religious and funerary ritual, offerings to the gods and the dead. And the idea that the rising smoke from this burning incense, it's the idea that it had this sort of spiritual quality that allowed a link with the divine through the smoke there. So it's a luxury item. It's a symbol of wealth, power, and prestige. So it really carries a lot of baggage. But I think the really interesting and crucial point here is that it's been constantly used since antiquity, and it's still important to modern Omani culture there. And Pliny the Elder, he tells us that incense was burnt on a lavish scale in the Roman Empire. And we have some quite famous stories, such as the Emperor Nero burning a year's worth of Arabian incense at the funeral of his wife Poppaea in Rome. So this absolutely sort of lavish and decadent use of incense there. Now, obviously, surrounding the sort of culture of incense, we have it inspired the creation of beautiful objects, such as the incense burners that we use to burn the incense as well. They have a long history. So we have many incense burners found in Oman from antiquity, made either in clay or stone or metal. The cuboid form with the horns there was very popular. And this form is very popular today in contemporary society. So the form really hasn't changed much at all. Now I'm showing you on the left an example that was found in Ras El Jins, that Bronze Age site I mentioned earlier, made of sandstone and decorated with animals there. And then on the top right, this is in fact a horned incense burner, incense altar from Petra, just to show you an example there of the typical sort of shape with the horns. And then down on the bottom right, you'll see some modern examples. And you'll see they're decorated there with geometric designs. And these are in fact inspired by the decoration of mud brick houses in Oman. So there's a link there between monumental architecture and the smaller objects as well. Now, just to finish off here, I'd like to talk about this so-called land of frankincense sites. These are sites in Dhofar that were inscribed by UNESCO in 2000 as being really important to frankincense and the identity of Oman. And a famous one is known as Khor Rori or Sumhuram there, so right down on the coast. It's a famous port and fortified Iron Age town, and it's been excavated by the University of Pisa for more than 20 years. And this is one of the many examples of towns that really flourished because of the trade route, specifically in frankincense. It might be the Mosca port that's mentioned by the ancient authors. This is one of the proposed sites there. And from here, frankincense, of course, was shipped to Yemen, or it could be shipped further east to India as well. And in fact, this particular port site was founded as an outpost for the kingdom of Hadramaut, which lies further west in Yemen. And at Khor Rori, there's been some really interesting finds suggesting a rich material culture. So we have lots of shell ornament, lots of mini little incense altars and incense burners there. We have a temple to the Mesopotamian moon god known as Sin, so the Temple of Sin. And we have this bronze plaque with South Arabian script dedicated to the moon god found in the so-called House of the Governor. So really rich material culture, just showing you how wealthy these cities were and the wealth they acquired through trade. Then we come to Al-Balid, which is on the outskirts of Salalah in the south, another ancient port city that really flourished in the medieval period. And this is where we find the famous Museum of Frankincense. And it was famous for exporting Arabian horses as well as frankincense then. So again, it has pre-Islamic origins, but this port city really flourished in the Islamic period. And it was also visited by famous travelers such as Marco Polo. And finally, we come to this desert outpost at Shisr. You see located on the map down there with the red dot on the left. And this is an oasis settlement, again, fortified. Just think these sites had to be fortified and protected, especially in remote locations, remote desert locations. It had a permanent water source. And outposts on the trade route were really common where there was a water source, of course, as you needed to take these stops to allow the camels to drink water and allow people to rest, for example. So it was on a junction between key caravan routes. And it has been identified as the so-called lost city of Ubar, which is mentioned in Arabic literature. So Ubar, or sometimes known as Wubar, was referenced in the Quran as an ill-fated desert city in the empty quarter that was inhabited by a wicked tribe that were punished by God and were sort of destroyed in a night. So since the 1990s, people have been sort of trying to find this famous lost city of Ubar, and it has been tentatively identified as the site in Shisr. And as you see on the satellite image here, the fortified walled city has this massive sinkhole right in the middle of it. And this possibly occurred around 300 CE, around that time, when there was a collapse of the limestone underneath. And it could be that this inspired the legend of the city destroyed in the empty quarter. So that's why scholars tend to identify this as the lost city of Shisr, because of this massive sinkhole. But what's important from this site is we have archaeological material from all over the place, from Rome, India, Persia, and that's, of course, thanks to the trade and the connections there. So to finish off, I'd just like to think about the endurance of incense. Oman's past and present is really connected by incense, and it's really a symbol of the cultural heritage and the sort of identity of Oman now. I think what's evident is that a lot has changed throughout history. There's been a lot of changing religion, a lot of political changes, different empires, different kingdoms. But throughout all this, incense has stayed the same. Incense has continued to be used. And it has this ability through its scent to really transport us back in time. So it creates a sort of link between the past and present. And we have these oversized replicas or these massive monuments modeled on incense burners in Oman, such as this example you see here in Muscat. And this is really testifying, I think, to how important it is to Omani cultural identity there. So incense was this catalyst for exploration and expansion. It was at the center of history and political developments and famous moments of history. It connected people. It promoted cultural interaction and also diversity. And of course, it's used across the world in just about all religions. And I think we all share its heritage because we've all at some time or another experienced incense, the smell of it. So I think we all kind of share in its heritage in that sense. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was really interesting.
That was wonderful. We do have a minute or two if anybody does have a question that they'd like to ask Lucy. I was absolutely taken by those divine camel petroglyphs. They were just possibly the most charming animal rock art I think I've ever seen.
Yes, I wish I could have shown the turtles, but I don't have my own images of those. So the turtle rock art's really fascinating too.
You showed those pictures of vessels being built and that they were an important part. Those mountains look very bare. Where did the wood come from for all those vessels?
The wood was imported from India. We have evidence that it was coming from India. So they did import a lot of the wood.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested with the frankincense trees. Do they just wait for them to grow naturally, or are they sort of trying to harvest them and grow them in areas so they've got forests of them?
Yes, well now because it's protected, so they have these nature reserves where they have nurseries and they encourage the growth and they plant and protect them in that sense because they are under threat now. So yes, they were harvested, and of course in antiquity they were as well.
Did the Egyptian queen manage to get them growing?
No, because it wasn't you have to have the exactly right climatic conditions. So we don't know what happened with her with her trees there.
No one's managed to take them away and grow them anywhere else in the world.
I've never heard of that. So it's more that they're naturally occurring. So there's parts of Somalia and I think India where you get other varieties, but not the Boswellia sacra, not that specific variety that produces the highest quality frankincense. So it's very limited where they can grow.
So I suppose that's where it came from when it was taken to Jerusalem. Baby Jesus, was it?
Yeah, definitely. That's the three wise men, with their frankincense and their myrrh. That's where it came from. Yep.
Yeah.
From South Arabia. Mm-hmm.
Can I add something into this?
Of course, Bida. Yes.
Thank you. Well, obviously, you could grow the frankincense anywhere. So they are not just in the south of Oman, they are in the north as well. Probably when we're traveling around Muscat, we might see some decorating some of the gardens or stuff from the houses and the buildings. They grow them in East Africa. They grow them in India. I saw them in Sri Lanka. They are even bigger in size in the ones from Salalah. But the things that makes the ones in Salalah is very unique is actually the weather. And therefore, the ones in Salalah could produce close from 7 kilos a year of frankincense, while those giant ones in Sri Lanka, for example, they would do less than 100 gram a year. And the reason is actually the weather. Even in Salalah itself, you could get different qualities of frankincense, depend where you grow them in Salalah itself, whether in the mountains close by from the sea or in the national reserve, which is toward the desert. And that's where the best frankincense actually comes from. So very much it depends on the weather. You could grow it anywhere, but end of the day, are you going to get that amount of frankincense out of it or not?
The yield that matters the most.
And I think it's interesting that there's one ceremony, and we've always just said it's incense. And I have noticed myself just recently thinking, I wonder what that is in there, but I guess that's what it is.
Well, not just you, many people. Theodore Bennett on the late 1800s wrote an article about the frankincense port in a journal for the Royal Society in Britain. And that's where ignite all of these interest about the frankincense and where it comes from. And then many of those explorers, they just travel to Salalah, trying to reveal all of these ports and trying to find the lost city of Sheba in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Before that, not many people, they almost know where it comes from, but it comes from Salalah, only that vertical part of the world.
I've got a couple of quick questions. How does that exclave of Musandam arise? And does it go back to the British period? And also, you were saying that the Omani culture was quite distinct, and you talked about its geographic separation. But I wondered about whether it was culturally quite mixed because of its involvement in the slave trade, earlier centuries, whether that's still the case today, or just a question about sort of, if you like, society and culture.
I mean, if you would look into that map that's presented by Dr. Lucy, you would see that long coast of Oman facing the sea. And in the other side, you have the mountains and the desert. So there is natural periods of traveling towards the west. And therefore, the Omanis ride the sea from the early time. And they travel in those boats from Reeds to India and far as to China and to East Africa. So therefore, the coast of Oman, when you travel along the coast of Oman, you would see these mixed of culture from everywhere, from east and west. But the thing that makes Musandam very unique, it's located at the Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz was one of the major sea routes, especially during the Hajj time, when all those ports traveled from India and from China for the Hajj in Saudi. And also all those boats that's coming from East Africa to trade with the Gulf. They have to go through the Strait of Hormuz. The mountains in Musandam are isolating that part of the country, not even with the political borders now with Emirates, but it was a natural barrier that separated it from the rest of Arabia. And therefore, when we do the sea trip, if you're joining our tour, we would go into the Strait of Hormuz, like the shortest wideness of that strait, where there would be an Omani village located just under those steep mountains, totally isolated from the rest of the country. The only way to get into it is either by boat or by a helicopter. And those people, they speak even a language, which is a dialect that is mixed of Portuguese, Arabic, and even English. Like the word for door on the Kamsari language is door in English. So they adopted all of these words from all those people they are traveling and stopping by all time. So that was the reason for that part of the country to have a different culture and develop those sort of different accents compared with the rest of Oman. Probably more than 5 languages spoken daily in the coast of Oman because of this communication with all those countries overlooking the Indian Ocean. So Swahili is spoken in most of the coastal roads, Baluchi, Urdu, and also we are having some of the old languages that's still spoken within the country. Down in Salalah, if you are interested, we could get some people who still speaks Shahri and Mahri. Those are some of the spoken languages that they are dying in Arabia. They used to have more than 15 spoken languages within Arabia. There is the Thamudic, there is the Syrianic, the Aramaic, there is the Ashuris, Sumeris, the Arabic, and also the South Arabia inscription, which most of those found items in Al-Balid and also in Samahram archaeological sites. All of these metal plates are engraved with a South Arabian inscription.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank Lucy again for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, not just for this lecture this evening, but also for all our Tuesday lectures. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.